Hi, I'm Jim Fitzgerald. I'm CTO at the Meditech Solutions Group of Dell Services. CTO, as Steve Harad reminded us all this morning, simply stands for capable of talking to others, and that's why I'm here. It's not for my flaming expertise. So I'll talk briefly about the Meditech Solutions Group, the historical healthcare data center in context, because I think as we look forward, it's interesting to look into the past. What we're predicting the impact of the cloud will be on the delivery of healthcare information systems. Just a quick preaching to the choir piece on pervasive virtualization and management coupled with infrastructure discipline, and then a quick look at summary caveats roadmap. Just by a quick show of hands, who actually works in a hospital or a healthcare provider organization? Okay, that's cool. Who works in a vendor that services the healthcare space? All right, thanks. Pretty even split. Appreciate you coming. Sorry, no trade secrets given away here. The Meditech Solutions Group, just briefly, we're a business unit of Dell Services. We used to be part of Perot. We used to be a company for 30 years called J.J. Wild. We've been acquired twice in 3 years, and we're just getting over it. So in a very swift span of time, we've gone from our tweens to our teenage years to adulthood. We work with over 1,000 hospitals in the English-speaking world every year. We attempt to do hardware-agnostic technology design, integration, implementation, and support. So we're this little $100 million outpost of Dell that you can buy HP from, but don't tell anybody I work for. We do managed services for Meditech hosting, disaster recovery, and archiving. So that's our external private cloud offering. Truly is, because it's 100% virtualized. The technology integration we do for Meditech is 100% on virtual platform. If customers don't choose to go that way, we make them sign a release saying, it's not our fault, you're stupid. And then finally, about 20% of our income is from doing applications consulting around the Meditech product. Who is Meditech? In case you don't know, they're a privately held software development company headquartered in Westwood, Mass., around the corner from us. One of their main development offices is literally half a mile. We sited ourselves on the same street for very good reasons. Meditech's employee-owned and has 3 generations of their healthcare information system installed in over 2,300 hospitals in North America and other English-speaking countries. They just recently translated to Spanish. They're a market share leader by site in the healthcare information system space. Their software can be bought in 50 individual modules, in excess of 50, all developed in-house. So 3 operating systems, a networking protocol, 4 or 5 different development environments and the associated compilers to their name. Every single one of their employees is in one of their 7 buildings in Massachusetts, USA. Who uses them? Everybody from 10-bed outpatient specialty surgery hospitals to 25-bed acute care hospitals to multi-thousand-bed integrated delivery networks or integrated service networks, depending on what you call the healthcare provider. So how do we put the healthcare data center in context? I was trying to make Meditech Magic Color terminals work over asynchronous modems when some of you were still in your Power Rangers jammies. But I think this is interesting stuff. So let's put the healthcare data center in context. Really, one of the problems I see, and this is still to some limited degree true today, is that most healthcare data centers are islands. They are islands that are restricted to either the hospital proper or the hospital proper and the community of surrounding physicians, or if it's a really progressive organization, the hospital proper, the surrounding physicians, and a little bit of a patient portal on their website. But in the old days, you had modem links or router links if you were really advanced to your clinicians, your suppliers, your payers, and your clinics. And really, all healthcare information systems were doing in that environment was automating the business. And they were automating the business 10 years behind the general market. The commercial side of the world had already done this. 10 years later, not much more progress had been made. They simply hooked up to the internet, popped up a general-purpose website, and started using VPNs instead of private networks. But now, as we look at the cloud, we really start to sense a change in the way healthcare is being provisioned and delivered. And when I say internal private cloud, I mean a highly disciplined environment that's completely virtualized. So I don't think it qualifies as cloud if it's not that. People would argue with me, but I'm the speaker. I'm allowed to make my own definition. So, hospitals are looking at this cloud, and healthcare information system staffs, if you were at the healthcare information system panel, are overworked and underpaid by vast measure compared to the general industry. If you want to make money, go work somewhere else. If you want to potentially help doctors save more lives, healthcare is not a bad place to be. You can feel good about what you're doing, but it is not loaded with money. The money's going really to the insurance companies more than anybody. It's coming out of your pockets because your benefits are less. It's coming out of doctors' pockets because Medicare and your insurers are randomly deciding to pay them less. And the only places it's not going to the hospitals. I have a hospital customer who 1 year got $1,279 from Medicare for every hip replacement they did. And a year later, we're getting $908 from Medicare for the same procedure with about a week's notice. This is what they call balancing the budgets on the backs of the healthcare infrastructure. So if you wonder why the quality of healthcare is declining a little bit in the United States, it's because nobody can figure out how to spread the suffering around evenly enough. What I hope is that if we bring these cloud and virtualization technologies to healthcare as a legitimate way to reduce the cost of delivering healthcare services, that money will surface to improve the healthcare you are being delivered and improve the lives of the doctors and nurses who are delivering that healthcare. I don't know if any of you have finished a surgery to lie in a hospital bed and have the general impression that you are surrounded by grouchy people who would rather be somewhere else. But that happened to me at Mass General Hospital, which was one of the best hospitals in the country, allegedly. We just think that because we think everything's better in Boston. But what's wrong with it? One thing that's wrong with healthcare that we're hoping vCloud Director will help is it's not connected. It's still an island. Most of these data centers that we either provide as a managed service or that we build locally really only connect to the things they absolutely have to. And I say to myself, what if that multi-slice 64-bit dense CT image that just got taken of you at your local hospital that's troubling the radiology department as to a diagnosis could be compared real time to a similar study that was done at a hospital 2,152 miles away because we had a national health information network that was cloud-based, and we could simply we could process our piece of the comparison job locally, shoot a file with the differentials out into that network, have it affiliate to a federated job running on the National Health Information Network, and within a few seconds get back a better diagnosis than we could produce locally. We have not, the network effect is saving some parts of the U.S. economy. If you look at what you can do at Amazon.com, if you look at what Google has pulled off, the network effect has not begun to improve healthcare yet because we are not connected together. So I think we have yet to realize the power of the investments that are being made in IT and healthcare. How is cloud being rolled out at hospitals? And again, this is just my experience and most of our experience. The vast majority of our customers are 100 to 300 bed community hospitals. Some of them, as I said, are multi-thousand bed rolled up corporate environments that have their own sort of hyper-powered IT staffs. But most of them are 100 to 300 beds. And what we're seeing is that PHR and HIE, so personal health records and health information exchanges, are starting to emerge out in the public cloud. Backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, archive as a service, all services we offer in our Dell Services cloud and are available in competitive clouds out there. Virtual desktops, entire system hosting, physician EMRs, limited scale HIEs, And really, but what's still being held very close to the vest inside of hospitals are their Tier 1 and 2 storage, their local networking, their local backup, database archiving, this kind of thing. But we think as the problems get greater and the data sets get larger, which I would dare say the data sets in healthcare are growing at a faster rate than the general population, though I can't quickly quote an IDC survey to prove that. I think given a couple of minutes, I could find one. But given the data sets are getting bigger and the applications are getting more complex and the expectations of the software as a partner to the physician or nurse or the lab manager in the delivery of care are getting greater, I think the IT staffs at hospitals will get to the point where they feel like, you know what, if we're going to deliver the optimal patient experience here, we can't do it all on our own engine. So I think we're going to see people looking to the public external or private external cloud to co-generate IT for them. I love using that utility language when I talk about cloud. And I think today this isn't too far off a representation of where the public or private cloud, which would be the blue in these charts, is starting to impact healthcare. I think you're going to see the blue take over much more of these charts if we took a similar snapshot a year or two out. So, you know, the building blocks for this cloud are no surprise to anybody. And I often got asked, and I got asked at the panel session, you know, what was the best thing about virtualization for Meditech hospitals? And it wasn't the consolidation ratio or the apparent savings in power and operating costs. In many cases, those are very hard to measure in the context of a small hospital. And I certainly wouldn't want to go sell VMware and have that mean that a billet in the IT department was removed. I know that's hot stuff on Wall Street, but I think it's bad ethics and morals where I live. So what I want to see when I roll out VMware is I want to see that the guy whose only job was to walk around and run backups, for example, in the data center, is now out on the floor helping people use the latest clinical software, maybe the stuff that does bedside meds verification so that we avoid one of the 10,000 preventable medication errors that kills a patient in a U.S. hospital every single year. So those are the sorts of things I'm interested in virtualization saving us staff so that we reallocate it to places where it can make a meaningful difference in the delivery of health care. But what's the most important aspect of this picture from my perspective? In terms of meeting the hospitals we have now where they live, it's the management tools. If you think about it, if you bought a purely physical infrastructure 5 years ago and you wanted to use OpenView or you wanted to use Patrol or you wanted to use Director or any other global management product to run it, you might be able to find one person on that IT staff in that 200-bed hospital who could be trained to run that product. But if they caught the flu and that's how you were managing your network, you were in big, big trouble. So really what happened was that almost, you know what, it's too hard to do, so we're just not going to do it because we have a list of 20 other things that are too hard to do. That's how a lot of management decisions get made in community health care. And so what happens is, unless the management is bundled to the core system, you don't get management. By virtualizing the physical assets, a lot of these hospitals got their very first ever management console in vSphere. And I think that was more valuable to them than a lot of things. I knew we had started to win when I was out to dinner with some of my friends from Arkansas Children's Hospital, and they pulled out the iPhone app that allows you to look at how workloads are distributed across ESX hosts, and said, Jim, I'm going to move this job right now. And a minute later, he was cutting into some prime steak. And I said, you know, this is a good thing. This is what we want. So I have felt the management piece is the most immediately valuable, and I think the Cloud OS is going to be the next most valuable thing. Maybe not to those same local IT staffs, but to us as consumers of healthcare in this country, because again, it has the possibility of accelerating the networking effect in healthcare. So The reality check here is we have some real serious constraints on cloud. I'm not a politician or even particularly interested in the political process. Well, I guess I'm interested, but I don't feel very empowered to impact it. I wish some of the stimulus money had been spent to lay more fiber in the United States. In Canada, where we do a little business with Meditech, the entire province of New Brunswick has fiber optic to every single home. So that's why if your OnStar system in your car makes a call, you get somebody with a bit of an accent calling the local 911 number for you. So the police department in Osserton, Kansas is hearing from some individual in Fredericton, New Brunswick about your car crashing. And yet that delivery model, that services delivery model, is enabled by a very powerful networking effect. So I would like to hope that we will make more pipeline investments. They're being made rurally, and a lot of people say we're at overcapacity in the big NFL cities. The fact is that the place where the network is really weak is not so much in rural America or in urban America. It's in the in-betweens. It's in the suburban places. It's in the places that are along regional highway belts where you have long hauls that are expensive to bury. And one of the problems was that the internet boom dried up before all the companies that were aggressively laying that fiber could finish. So I'm hoping we'll see that expand because that's stopping, having a true national cloud that could help healthcare. I think we also have to see an organizational willingness to co-generate. Hospital boards aren't run by hardcore technologists. They're not run by hardcore businessmen. A lot of times they're run by local doctors, lawyers, and politicians. And the decisions they're making are ones that they feel are in the best interests of their community, but they're not always mindful of what's going on at VMworld. And finally, I think we need a technical readiness to co-generate. And that is, you look at the things that you can do to help, and the thing we feel we've been able to do to help in the Meditech Solutions Group is align people's infrastructure investments with a private-public cloud IT model. So, some of the pain points I've already touched on in healthcare are staffing, facilities, budget, external regulation, and compliance. For example, to be fully ARRA compliant, or American Recovery and Reinvestment Act compliant, and then to reach a level of quote-unquote meaningful use, there are certain hurdles that hospitals have to cross. If they cross the hurdles, they potentially, and they do it in time, which is getting to be harder and harder because the clock is ticking. And I believe February 2011 is the first cutoff date for meaningful use of clinical information systems. If you hit that early date, there's a pot of money you can repay your IT investments from that the government will give you a piece of. The bad news is there's a lot of unfunded mandates that come with that. For example, all your data at rest that you didn't have to encrypt last year has to be encrypted, right? Now, one of the cool things going on underneath the virtualization stack is folks like VMware and folks like EMC are looking at building encryption into their path management algorithms between the physical servers and the SAN, right? Those things might help us. And to the degree that those encryption efforts translate to virtual path managers, then we'll really have something that can help. But hospitals are expected to implement those things whether they have the money to or not. And that's really only a simple example. HIPAA compliance measurements and engines, which are much harder to do because you have to touch all the employees whether or not they use a computer in their daily lives, gets even a little harder. And that's an area, where we hope to help with things like a virtual client offering. But you have also impossibly high user expectations. A lot of the folks who are leaving medical school They're at the big urban universities that are extremely well funded, and just like those urban universities have a lot of money to throw at their football programs, their medical schools have a ton of money to throw at technology. It's not really representative of what a lot of those growing doctors will get when they get out into the real world, but they're using the most state-of-the-art systems generally in a lot of those medical schools. Then they graduate and come out and get a job in the real world at a community hospital, and they have very high expectations, and their first reaction is disappointment. But maybe if we can put a virtual client in place that will give them the same desktop experience across their mobile handheld, their home PC, their Mac notebook, and the Dell machine they use at the nursing station, maybe all of a sudden they're a little bit happier with their world and they do a little better job. So, when I walked into this business many years ago, if you went to do a network assessment of a hospital, which I came from a network consulting background, it wasn't unusual to find 2 or 3 versions of Windows, 1 or 2 versions of Unix, the occasional System 1 or AS400, multiple server brands, multiple network infrastructure vendors, multiple application providers, because sometimes, for whatever reason, the politics around buying healthcare information systems are very squirrely. And yeah, you could buy 50 modules from Meditech and do everything your hospital needs, except they don't sell a PACS system. They interface to 120 different PACS systems, but they don't sell one. You could buy it all from them, but folks who should know better end up buying, 28 Meditech applications and 14 applications from a variety of boutique best-in-breed vendors, and then a handful of other things that you just can't get anywhere else. And you take sort of this underfunded IT staff, and then you make them manage that mess. And now you start to have a picture of what healthcare information systems feels like in real time. And you might have got an ugly picture like this that my Canadian friends would call a dog's breakfast. And I would say that complexity is the mother of most IT issues. I think if we graphed complexity, against IT morale and user satisfaction, we would see curves traveling in other directions, and we would see support issues and management costs going up steeply to the right. Raymond Chandler, the famous writer of dark detective fiction, said, "Keep it simple, Eddie. When a man gets complicated, he gets unhappy. And when he gets unhappy, his luck runs out." We don't want our luck to run out in healthcare IT. And so I think there's a simple formula here that virtualization plus infrastructure discipline for these very small hospitals that I generally work with equals a certain amount of happiness. And what we tell them is you can't get it. I sound like someone in a 12-step program. I actually am in one, but we like to say half measures avail nothing. And I say the same thing to folks who are trying to recover from the traditional way of doing IT. If you do half the virtualization, does not take a rocket scientist to understand. The average number of servers in the back room of one of these hospitals I work with is about 150 or 120. And a lot of them, like some of you would know, because again, this is preached in the choir, are running one application. And in some cases, it's an application using 0.25% of the capability of the box to do fundraising. Though the fact that that thing shoots to, 60% of the box 6 times a year is enough to make the math difficult for a lot of the folks I work with. So you've got these 150 servers, and what's worse about them, out of the 150, 50 are brand X, 50 are brand Y, and 50 are brand Z. And out of the ones that are brand X, there are 5 different models represented. And somebody on the IT staff is convinced that the best way to get the next notch in their belt is to convince the boss to move it all into blade servers, and that's going to solve all their problems, until they find out that all the effort they should be making in trying to get their VCPs right, is going to get spent on learning the management console for the blade servers and on troubleshooting problems with the midplane in the blade system. So, you run into these weird problems like this, and you really end up having to tell this story over and over again so that people will say, you know, you got to kind of get it. So we recommend that when people virtualize, they virtualize everything. Because if you've got those 150 servers and you only virtualize 75 of them, yeah, you had an immediate impact on your operating costs. Yeah, you had an improvement of reliability and scalability instantly, but you've still got 75 physical beasties to manage. And that's almost as much work as 150 physical beasties. And now you have to go learn to use vCenter, which means you have less people to tend the physical beasties. So we very much believe that the benefits don't come until you go all the way and virtualize everything. And this is what we tell people. And it's hard because sometimes, and some of you are sitting in the room, their software vendor will say, no, you may not virtualize that. Or if you do, you'll have to move it back to a physical environment to have it troubleshooted. To the extent we have control over things, we talked Meditech out of that stance 4 years ago. But you know, to the extent we don't, people still have point vendors and point solutions in there. So if you're with one of those software companies, come clean and just get the hell over it. Anyway, so the functional tenets of this infrastructure discipline that we talk about are just that all the application infrastructure provisioning possible is done through virtualization and central management. And I got to tell you, I have a mixed set of feelings walking through the solutions exchange, right? I get a little thrill at all the new technology out there because if anything's going to save our economy, it's innovation. When you forget how to make things and you stop making things, you add no value and you have no more economic power. It's great to be in a place where we see a reasonable pace of innovation and people making new things. But the flip side of that is that I live in a world where the CIOs of most of these hospitals are often in that position because the CFO was their uncle. And they're held captive by a technical staff that knows 3 times more than they do about technology. And somebody on the technical staff is dictating what the capital investments are going to be because if they don't get what they want, they're going to take their toys and go home. And if, in fact, that happens, the hospital's in a lot of operational trouble. So this gets to be a hard message for people to hear. And, you know, somebody like that would very reasonably walk through the solutions exchange and say, you know, I want that management overlay tool, and I want that management overlay tool, and I want that management overlay tool. And by the way, they're right, you know. Those are good, value-added products that can help them do a better job. But you know how they look to some CIOs? The answer to the question gets to be, oh, virtualization's too expensive to do the right way. We can't afford that, right? So this tends to be the cold, hard reality we're coping with. So, you know, I'd encourage those of you who are excited by things like that to put them in perspective. Win the virtualization battle first, and then win the cool tool to add on top battle. So I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff fairly quickly because I think there's a lot of true believers already in the room. You already know the VDI story and the View story. We've rolled up a solution we call Secure Virtual Client with our friends at Imprivata, with our friends at Forward Advantage, and a few other companies. And we are delivering a turnkey virtual desktop that not only does everything you would expect VDI to do in terms of lowering costs and delivering better service, but it also has Meditech's full support. So, you know, there's a registry entry you can read when you're inside the View client shell, and Meditech updates that entry so that View will know where it is, and it looks at what View's putting in there so that we have real network location awareness when we roll these solutions out. It sounds like a simple thing, but it makes all the difference in how workflows work in hospitals. We still have problems we're trying to solve with virtual clients. One of the problems that we have yet to solve, though we are very optimistic that we'll be able to solve it with View 4.5, is that sometimes if you want to do bedside meds verification in healthcare, you need the USB device to appear as a barcode reader and not as a keyboard or human interface device. Unfortunately, they frequently pop into USB redirects as keyboards. If they show up as a keyboard, then the bedside meds verification breaks, because it represents the likelihood, not that this would truly happen, but there would be a possibility that a nurse could type in a false barcode at a keyboard because the barcode's incorrectly being seen as keyboard entry. So I no longer have a legally verifiable audit trail that tells me I administered the right dose of the right medication to the right patient at the right moment, right? And that eliminates the value of that system. So it's getting the details right in healthcare is really important, and we've been grateful for the support we've been getting from VMware and others in trying to work through those issues as we roll out a virtual client solution for our customers. The story we tell about server farms is, pick 2 models and get over it, right? Whatever your favorite brand and vendor is, pick something with maybe 2 sockets and 6 cores, then pick something with 4 sockets and N cores, make those your 2 standards, do the provisioning and the SLAs from vCenter, and move on. And we think this creates potential funding benefits in the sense that once you're comfortable enough with this model, you don't necessarily have to keep buying the hardware manufacturer's warranties, right? Do you think Google buys any warranties? Google buys a specialized version of a 2U server from Dell that's painted yellow. Dell ships them out by the thousands every month to Google data centers. The interesting accessory that comes with each one is a yellow Google t-shirt. And that's there to incent the guy who has to physically install the server into a rack. He gets to keep the t-shirt. They then boot into a hypervisor that's based on a proprietary Google technology. And they join Google's network and become part of the great search engine in the cloud. Google doesn't take maintenance agreements from Dell. If one of those breaks, it wants to touch it as little as possible. It pulls it out of the rack, it puts a new one in, and it sends the old one for recycling. They pay their techs so much that they don't even feel it's worth doing a hardware diagnostic on the failed machine. Okay? So that is, and that might sound like crazy talk to a community hospital, but I'm going to refresh infrastructure in a community hospital every 3 to 5 years if I'm there. Most of my failures are going to be inside the basic warranty envelope. If I can get down to 2 models instead of 10, I can decline the support agreements, potentially save an amount of money that for every probably 3 servers I decline it on would fund me another server. So if I need 20 physicals, I can probably buy 6 spares if I wanted that many. And frankly, for 20 physicals, you probably only need 2 or 3 spares. No comments. Anyway, the same, I think, is true of networking. And I'm absolutely stunned by the resistance out there to 10 gig backbones. And it's interesting. The vast majority of sites that ask me to come in and do, a quick sniff of their physical and virtual infrastructure and, provide an executive summary of the CIO or the CFO about the state of their IT. They've made recent investments perhaps in virtualization, but the network they built 6 years ago with all the 1 gig fiber backbone ports and even 1 gig connections to the servers, they still remember how much that cost. And they think because it doesn't have as many moving parts as a server or a SAN, that it ought to last 10 years. And this becomes one of the problems we have pulling off virtualization implementations in healthcare, in that the network has some dirty little secrets that we have to dig out before we can succeed. So this tends to be an interesting thing. What I'm hoping is that if you look at what VMware is doing with vShield, for example, from this morning's announcement, and you look at what's being done with endpoint security, if we can move more and more of the differentiating services into the hypervisor, And I think the Nexus 1000V is a good, real-world example of that. If we can move more and more differentiating services into the hypervisor, then this simplification strategy in the back room can work on the network too, because then all you'll really need is a very, very capable, low latency, crossbar type switch, and all the routing and all the port virtualization, all the differentiation will be done in the hypervisor. And this is really going to allow simplified network designs that can be managed in a fairly flexible and compact way. We see the same thing with storage. Storage in our space is very interesting. The requirements are growing rapidly. If I implemented a Meditech electronic medical record 4 years ago, it would be likely that the database spec for 3 years of storage for it would have been something like 84 gigabytes. I get that spec today, and it's normally 900 gigabytes. And Meditech has adopted a technology as part of its seamless audit trail plan where they basically never delete anything. They only do appends in their 6.0 software. And then they aggressively re-index those appends at night. So this drives you mental if you're trying to do the workload balancing on a virtualized system all day long. I've got 15 file servers or application servers in a typical hospital slamming away at a database at a pretty steady state rate of 300 IOPS. And then at 1 in the morning, they all wake up together at the same moment to do their re-indexing. And on certain servers, that re-indexing takes my I/O load to 2,000 IOPS. And I have to do that 2,000 IOPS in a 5 millisecond latency envelope or the database starts to cry foul. So it really creates these situations where building that SAN to support that and having that SAN support non-Meditech applications in the enterprise and perhaps even the storage aspect of virtual clients gets to be a little challenging. We're lucky that solid-state storage happened on the scene sort of just in time for all this. We are aggressively moving. Our lab qualifies product from EMC, HP, and IBM for Meditech. And you can use any of those products with Meditech. And we're rapidly qualifying the storage auto-tiering or auto-destage to flash in hopes that we can service that bump without building God's own SAN underneath it for the 1 hour a day that we actually need it. So, that's sort of what's going on. We also have another interesting protocol in Meditech. Meditech was 3 or 4 years ahead of the industry in using SAN-based point-in-time copies for backup. The technology is called ISB. To support ISB, we have to use raw disk maps. That means until last year, SRM was sort of right out for us. But SRM is now right in, and what we're doing is we've worked with Meditech and some of the third-party providers in the space like Bridgehead Software and EMC, and they've come up with a version of the protocol where now we can either control the state of a synchronous mirror, both the directional state and the active state of a synchronous mirror, or control the state of a recover point appliance from the ISB protocol. And by doing that, we can either use snaps or bookmarks to create a virtually unlimited set of recovery possibilities at either a local data center or a backup or secondary data center that's synchronized to the local. And we're also beginning to do that out in the cloud. We're doing it with deduplicated data streams over low-speed links right now. As the real cloud gets cheaper and more built out, we'd like to do the recover point model into our managed service as well. So we're doing some interesting things there. And I sort of talked through what's in this slide, which is we're trying to move to that more flexible backup and recovery model. And we want to wrapper the whole thing with SRM. Right now, because in most of our existing customer primary data center, secondary data center environments, we can't do SRM. We're forced to build these very complex run books that essentially walk you through the failover. But if anyone's been through this, they know that there's a huge difference between failover and failback. And that's one of the things we're excited about, these changes in the ISB protocol and about being able to support SRM going forward. because we think we'll actually finally be able to do failbacks. We can do optimally about a 20-minute failover now. So we do have some RPO and RTO issues there, but we're a lot closer to zero than we ever were before. And I think this is the year we're going to get to zero. And then finally, we're trying to archive more flexibly. Virtualization, except to the extent that it's touched storage, hasn't touched archiving too deeply yet. It's still sort of spreading its way down into that part of the infrastructure. But again, this is a place where people have an archive for their Philips PAC system. They have an archive for their Meditech system. They have an archive for Exchange. And they're all separate pieces of hardware. And it's just really terribly wasteful, and it's because nobody has come up with universal middleware to broker that data through multiple systems. So they have this whole series of roach motels where the data can get in, but it can never get out. And if you think about it, if you're in the state of California where we're sitting right now, if you see a patient in your hospital, you have an obligation to keep that medical record till they've been dead 7 years. All right, now in a hardware refresh cycle, if I live to be 82 years old, which I believe is the average in America, and I saw that patient as an infant, that means I have an 89-year data retention requirement on everything that I've ever seen from that patient. That is, at a minimum, the way hospitals invest 13 technology cycles. That's at a 7-year replacement of the archiving hardware. It's just insane. So if I paint them into a corner, all I'm setting them up for is really expensive migration costs in the future. So, these are the architecture problems we would hope to solve by centralizing on a vendor-neutral archive that can be accessed for email, that can be accessed for PACS, that can be accessed for other systems, including Meditech. So how do we keep it all secure? I'm not going to waste your time with this. Everything I know about vShield I learned in the last 10 minutes. Not really. Maybe in the last 10 days. But I'm excited about this. It already has sparked some thinking by the folks who do our virtual client work and the folks who do our hypervisor layouts about how we can enhance security, lower costs. And what I just hope is that we don't end up with 50 layers of vCenter. If I could have my magic wish list from VMware, it would be decomplicate that GUI as much as possible, because you have to just drill way too deep to do anything right now. Decomplicate it and force all the new tools from all the new acquisitions to populate in there as applications, so that it really remains that central management console. And if you have to charge more money for that management and then drop the cost of the hypervisor, by all means do so, because that's the real value in the system. Somebody liked that idea. To make this work, you need a direct linkage to the IT strategic plan, strong support of senior management, armies of Girl Scouts selling cookies, America, Mom, Love, and apple pie. And how to get started? Be uncompromising, be a pain in the neck, insist on pervasive virtualization. If you're a technical person, somebody brought this up in the session, be willing to be accountable to the business needs of your organization. Show them where the money is that they're saving. There are folks at VMware, there are folks in my business, there are folks in a lot of other companies that float around this ecosystem that have very complicated TCO models. One is bound to fool somebody you work for. So I would just keep trying. And, I think don't be afraid of the cloud. Be afraid of not understanding the cloud. If you're here and you're staying ahead of that by educating yourself on what's going on with cloud federation and cloud virtualization, what you're doing is going to help your career, and it's also going to help us deliver better health care. So what's working well for us? ESX vSphere to support Meditech production. Our operations are literally flawless at hundreds of hospitals and at our hosting facilities. We probably touch the data centers of 10 hospitals every single month in terms of a rebuild, a refresh, or a new rollout. And so for the 36 months from September of 2007, that's at least 360 individual hospitals that we've rolled out VMware at. And they're all working just fine, thank you. And they're all production workloads. These aren't tests. These aren't proof of concepts. These aren't labs. These are the stuff that they're using to run the business. The resource management is working. We've integrated Meditech's proprietary backup and recovery techniques. If you like war stories, we had a funky thing where there's a version of Meditech called Magic, where it's really their own operating system abstracted on Windows, where the NIC looks very, very physical to the machine, to the point where the NIC's MAC address is a configuration parameter in Meditech. And we had a very early problem with some accounts where, depending on how that physical NIC got mapped to a VNIC, Meditech would think it had two, and it would start creating duplicate packets, which would cause collisions on switchback planes and have some very expensive Cisco 65XXs coughing up hairballs at precisely the wrong moments. So it was a relatively simple task to dope out what that was and fix it by either manually reconfiguring Meditech, which we don't recommend, or manually configuring the VNICs in VMware, which is somewhat non-optimal because then you can't do NIC teaming anymore. But this, as a problem, generally is going away because an increasing number of Meditech hospitals are running one of the client-server versions of Meditech. We are developing, as best we can, a data center around workload affinities in healthcare, both of Meditech applications and of non-Meditech applications that we host in our private cloud so that we can optimize the way those are provisioned. And we are finding that though our adopters of View are early adopters, they are all doing better than expected. We're very optimistic about that technology. Almost every single hospital we work with has been paying taxes to Citrix and Microsoft for a really long time. And for those of you from VMware who were kind enough in the room to come in and listen to me talk, I would just say keep telling people that you can only charge the way those guys do if you keep innovating. If you let the product stagnate and you keep showing up every 3 years to collect taxes, people are going to start to dislike you. And that's why View is going to rock the worlds of a lot of our hospital customers. Even though they've used Citrix for years, it feels like being in prison. So they're going to go to View. But if View feels like being in prison in 3 years, they're going to hate that and go to something else. So please hear me when I share that with you. Where's there room for improvement? I think compliance pressure is unfortunately focusing a lot of hospital CIOs very narrowly onto ambulatory and acute care clinical applications. Really, this is the pursuit of getting the ARRA money or paying less in penalties. This is going to go away. This is going to go away in about 3 years. And the mad rush to do clinical information systems is going to turn into the, oh shit, how are we going to run all this? And that's when it'll be nice to whip out your virtualization toolkit and solve some problems. Hospitals still understand the need for Microsoft certified professionals, but are hazier on VCPs. The admin skill hasn't really caught up to the need. We're certainly messaging. Whenever we talk to a CIO or a CFO or a CEO, we say this is a place to invest. We really would like to see vCenter realize its promise as a central manager and not become the Balkan states of plug-in tools. We think customers and suppliers are a little unclear on where to make networking and security investments. In the virtual era, we feel like we're stuck in the middle between highly differentiated, complex to manage physical appliances and software and emerging virtual techniques. Hey, if you stay for one more slide, we have free stuff. Oh, well, yeah, the new Dell iPad. and we have site recovery manager support for point-in-time copies. One of the worst conversations I had in the last 2 years was with the site recovery product manager who insisted that he could not understand why we would want to take snapshots that we have on disk and use them as recovery targets. That why wouldn't we just want to use a synchronous mirror, because that's what it was equipped to look at. So we're encouraged that support of Recover Point, which we're afraid happened because of our rich uncle, is happening. We've had no movement on that, and it's a bummer for us because 400 of our hospitals are making point-in-time copies at secondary data centers today, and we can't cover them with SRM unless they switch to sync mirroring or Recover Point. A lot of them can't afford the bandwidth to run to sync mirroring. And finally, we need view compliance for more platforms, but I feel pretty sure that our friends are working on that. What's next for us in terms of what we're trying to do in the Meditech space? We obviously don't like it, but we feel like we have to put some overlays beyond vCenter into our customer space. We're looking at ways of integrating VMware Consolidated Backup and Meditech ISB. VMware is engaged directly with Meditech on this, and we're trying to act as the neutral country where they can do some testing with all the toys in our lab. We are learning and testing. I should change this to vShield. These are some old slides. We're testing virtual federation between customer clouds and Dell Services clouds, hopefully in the next 6 months, now that we can get our hands on a non-beta vCloud director. We're excited about that. And as part of that, we're very anxious to test long-haul vMotion because, again, we think understanding how those things work and the underlying network configurations that are necessary will put us in a position to help customers build this major healthcare cloud that should improve patient care. We would like to leverage deeper integration between vCenter and Meditech-approved storage platforms in our lab. And that's all I got. Thanks for staying so long. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them either in a public forum or afterwards. And come get some free stuff. We have promotional items for our secure virtual client solution, and please feel free to take one or more. Yeah. That's a good idea. The answer is no. There isn't a white paper. We should write one. Thank you. We will. Coming soon to a website near you. Yes?
I think for especially compliance personalization, sort of a double-edged sword, I think it makes something easier and harder. What you could expound on what your experience?
So the question was, what's our experience with HIPAA compliance and virtualization? And the thought is that maybe it's a double-edged sword. I might be missing something big, but we don't see that yet. What we see is a lot of hospitals that we sort of took a prototype of our virtual client offering out to and sort of did a formal presentation and explained it, said, you know what, can I switch to that on my current PC refresh? Because that solves this problem of potential data breach for me very, very quickly. So I don't see a downside there. Now, I think you may have a solid point that it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that if all my underlying infrastructure assets in the data center are virtualized, it's bad enough in a SAN that I don't, if I've got a highly virtualized SAN, I don't necessarily know which physical disks my data are on. So then I'm sort of forced to encrypt. But in at least 3 states, I already have to encrypt at gunpoint. California and Massachusetts are 2 of them, and I think New York's headed in that direction. And I'll have to encrypt by high-tech mandate by early next year anyway, nationwide. So I think I sort of get past that problem, though I would agree with you, having the encryption state of a storage resource report up to vCenter would be a nice thing. But given the very tight alliance between VMware and a lot of their storage partners, I expect that will happen. I'm an optimist. Yes, over here. We only go, I agree with you, it's a rather narrow outlook. I worry about privacy mainly in terms of the HIPAA and the High-Tech Act. High-tech not meaning high technology, it's actually a long, painful government-generated acronym. I care a little bit about PI-PETA, which is the version of HIPAA that's in Canada, because those are the two places where 92.5% of Meditech's customers are. The other places where Meditech is installed in English-speaking countries or hospitals that use software written in English in places like Singapore and the United Arab Emirates, there's not a lot of worry about regulation. There is a lot of worry about not offending anybody. Yes, back here.
Yeah, it seems like these days whenever I'm brought into a healthcare vertical, it's almost all around virtual desktop discussions right now.
Mm-hmm.
Curious as to what your take is that's going on in the accounts you're talking to between the Citrix and the View opportunities that are out there. Maybe what's working, what's not working in that space.
We have very little real-world experience implementing View under our belts. I think we've just done our first official site, so we've now done two, because we did one kind of unofficially. The early feedback is fabulous. People feel like, we get comments like, who made my PC faster, right? End user doesn't know that it's not now on a virtual machine in the data center. And they ask who made it faster because it looks like the same old desktop they had yesterday. We obviously see the attraction of lobotomizing the existing desktops so that they don't have any local storage. In terms of how you compare that to Citrix, I have to say it might not be the answer you're looking for. I mean, we could talk about the fact that first of all, I have 0 customers running Zen Desktop, right? And it's the exception that a Meditech hospital doesn't have at least a handful of licenses for Presentation Manager. But Presentation Manager is not a virtualized version of Windows, it's a hosted version of Windows. And let's think about that. Let's think about hosting an instance of a workstation OS and sharing it across a number of machines. It's absolutely ghoulish. It frightens you if you think about the technical complexity involved in having that be stable, right? So from that perspective, and you can't have that conversation with most of our customers, but the conversation you can have is that they're about to renew their Enterprise Plus package with Citrix, and it's going to be $240 a desk, and that they can replace that with VMware for $160 a desk. And then we can look at what they'll save by switching to thin and zero clients as they do the tech refresh. If we can make it come out even, it's a win. And usually we can. I believe the people who say if you cast a broad enough net with the TCO analysis, at the end of the day it's less money. But I'll repeat what I said at the beginning and hopefully not bore the crap out of you. But I think it's cooler if you get some bodies off of the PC help desk and put them out on the floor than it just having less support calls as a statistic. I didn't answer your question, did I? What was your real question? I'm not ready to pronounce one better than the other because I know who writes my paycheck. And Michael Dell is buddy with a lot of people at Zen. Well, I will tell you this. We support what Meditech supports. Meditech's rewriting their client shell to support View. I wonder what I'm going to support tomorrow. Decision made. I will tell you that XenApp, the confusion between Presentation Manager and XenApp is being greatly used to the advantage of Citrix. And it's often one of the first conversations we have to say, this is X, this is Y, and this is Z, and these are the differences. Any others over here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have them in a slide somewhere that I did at a Meditech user group. But what version of Meditech are you guys on? It should work. It's supported in 5.6.3 Service Release 5. And I think the service releases are consistent across versionings, so 5.6.4 SR5 should work. There's also a priority pack associated with that, and I don't know what the priority pack number is. But if you call your HCIS coordinator at Meditech and ask them for the view-compatible version of the client, after they say what, they'll type an email to somebody who knows the answer and give them a day or two, and you'll find out. Yes? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that translates well to the support staff having easier time with VMware View, or you need to add staff to support the VMware View?
Okay, so the question I think is, do you get as much benefit from virtualizing the desktop as you do from virtualizing the server room?
No, I'm thinking more like support staff or in-house knowledge.
Okay.
Is it easier to go to the View versus right now we have Zen desktop and VMware for servers?
Okay. I think because there is some similarity of the learning curve between ESX and vSphere and between View, I think if you've already digested the learning curve on the hypervisor, it's probably easier to manage View in a stack. And so I would say in general, yes, that's true. But if you want to get into the details on that, let's take some time afterwards. Be glad to help you with that. Any other questions? Thank you very much. You're a wonderful audience. It's a long day.